Hi, my name is Bill, and welcome to my shop that specializes in the restoration of antique clocks and vintage electronics. Located in downtown Antigo, about a half a block down from the corner of Superior Street and 5th Avenue. Shop is right on Superior Street, otherwise known as Highway 45 North and South, so it's one of the prime locations in Antigo, and I waited for this spot for about 20 years, and finally in November of last year it opened up, and January 2nd of this year I moved in. This is 2014, and we are in the week between Christmas and New Year's, and I hope you had a good Christmas. I do a little subcontract work for a clock shop over in Green Bay, and one of their customers brought in this radio that we're looking at. This is also known among collectors as a grandfather clock radio. My friend Chuck, who is a technician over there, wired the clock. The customer wanted the clock to have a separate power cord on it. Originally it was connected to the power underneath the chassis, and Chuck brought it to the customer's attention about the shoddy wiring on the chassis, and referred the customer to me to rejuvenate the radio and thus correct the wiring and do a few other necessary things as well. This radio was manufactured by RCA for Westinghouse Corporation. This is the WR-12 model, Columarie. New Haven manufactured the clock. I'm going to walk over and take a look at it. The plastic cover has been taken off for this video. This clock was manufactured by the New Haven Clock Company for Westinghouse. And this is a biosynchronous clock, and that means it does not start on its own power. You have to flick a switch, and this was common among clocks of the day. The clock isn't plugged in. If it were, it should continue to run, and it will continue to run, because the technicians over at the clock shop in Green Bay, Clock Place in Green Bay, are masters of their craft. So that's basically how that works. And we'll get down and take a look at the controls. Have the peep window dial, and on the left is the volume control. This is a taper pot. This isn't a linear pot. Taper means that I have to turn it up about 2/3 of the way before I start hearing anything. It actually controls the cathode voltage on the first RF tube, something that was common on radios back in that day. We also have the tuning control and the tone control, bass and treble. On the side is the off-on switch, and the grill work is on the top. This is a top firing speaker. A bit unusual. The cabinet on this radio is in remarkable condition. You can look at the grain on the veneer. There's not a scratch, a gouge, or any mark on this radio. It belongs to a very discriminating collector. Take a little bit of a look there, and we'll make our way around. More grain. Just a really nice deco radio. These radios were in vogue around the period 1930-1932, made by different manufacturers. I knew somebody one time that had 100 of these. I couldn't imagine collecting that many myself, but everybody has their tastes. I particularly like radios of the 1936, 7, 8 into the 1939 vintage. Mostly 36, 7, and 8 in Zeniths, Magnavox, RCA, Stromberg Carlson, wood case, multiband. There we see the speaker. and a little bit of the field coil. The wiring that I did, tubes, and by the way, the tubes were all good, and they are Coke bottle tubes. They're not all original tubes to the radio, but they are the Coke bottle type. And we'll get back in and take a look at the transformer. Notice the transformer has holes in the top for ventilation. This transformer had gotten very hot because of the way it was wired, and there was some seepage down on the chassis. This was a chassis just waiting to have an accident happen. The owner of the radio told me he took it to another shop in Green Bay, which supposedly is very good at antique radio restoration. Took a look at it and said, oh, it's just fine, there's no problem with this radio. Well, there were problems with it, and they were corrected. The wire coming down is from a makeshift antenna that somebody put in this radio, installed it years ago, so one would not have to run an outside antenna, as was common in the day, and or an antenna wire around the floor of the living room. And it works quite well, but definitely not original. This box right here houses the input and output audio transformers. This box right here is basically a box that's full of PCBs and connections for bypass and connecting capacitors. And I replaced all of those. I wish I had left the chassis out on the bench so you could see the work that I had done. It was quite extensive. And I just decided to do this video on a whim this afternoon. I have not made a video for YouTube in almost 2 years. So I feel like I'm kind of cutting my teeth again. Maybe a little bit rough, but just bear with me. Over there we see the remnants of the original, one of two original capacitors. That was the 10 microfarad. That hole that you see there was the one that had the 4 microfarad capacitor installed on it. Now what I found, and what concerned the customer, was first of all this capacitor, which leaks, and I believe, as close as I could measure, who knows if it's accurate or not, you certainly can't read it, and I'll explain why in just a moment. It read at about 22 microfarads. It was standing in the chassis kind of like this. Wire came out the top, ran down into the hole where the other capacitor had been connected. And this capacitor formed the B plus as well as the bias or B minus circuit. And to get B minus, it was electrical taped right around that old condenser. The old condenser is separated from the chassis by a phenolic washer. So we'd have the B minus. Now, the field coil is part of that circuit. The field coil had not been wired correctly. And I took a look at why, and this is why. The radio seemed to work perfectly. This big brute here is an 80 microfarad electrolytic, 450 volts. It was kind of laying right down in here, something like that there, with the wires going underneath the chassis. Now, I fired this chassis up before I did any work using my one of my two Variacs. Those are Suncor power rights, and I could not function in this shop without them. I was reading about 1.25 amps, or 1250 milliamps, and normally this radio should draw, and does draw now, between 750 and 800 milliamps. 1250 milliamps is too high for a set like this. The transformer was hot to the touch, and it was just a very unsafe, kind of a hair-raising sensation that I got from it. So I wired in the correct value. I didn't have a 10 and a 4, but I did have two 10s, and I wired those in, fired it up. I was still getting a lot of current. still right around 1250 milliamps. And awful distortion. I couldn't figure that out. And then I got to doing a little checking, and I found out that the field coil had been wired in incorrectly. And to do away with hum, this technician, and I use the word loosely, had wired in the 80 microfarad capacitor. The more microfarads, the less hum. Just one thing back in the day, in the 20s and 30s, there were a lot of old radio men who didn't believe in following diagrams. They didn't use Rider, they didn't use SAMs. They kind of wired by the seat of their pants. They could make things work. The son of the original Zenith dealer in Anago told me one time that his dad never or rarely ever looked at a diagram. He just knew what to do and did it. Some guys didn't do it right, but it worked, just like this radio did. And we see a little bit of the tube complement and the model number. And this also had an input for a magnetic phonograph pickup. We're going to walk around now, and as I get up off of my haunches here, I'm going to walk around to the front, plug it in, and see if we can pick any station up on it. I'll flip on the switch, and the pilot light, and the peep window dial comes on, and I believe we're set up here for output from the SS Tran. Maybe not. As I said, this is a tapered pot. And you can see I have to keep turning until I start to hear something. The SS Tran was given to me by a good friend of mine last year, and I am feeding signal from my computer into it. It's rebroadcasting that signal at 1340 kilohertz. Let's go over and see if I can pick up the local station, WATK. There it is.
We'll help you with your home improvement fast, at a price that won't break your budget. Just call us or stop in for free consultation.
WATK went on the air in 1949, and between WATK, WSAU, and Wausau and my SS Tran, I have pretty good signal for testing radios. Oh, gotta show you the helpers here. We have Pearls and her adopted grandmother, who's sound asleep, Ladybug. Ladybug's mother was Shasta. I had Shasta for 12 years, and she passed away just a short time ago. So, kind of a sad Christmas. That's about it. I'm going to kind of take a couple of seconds, pan around here, show you what I've got, and we'll spend more time as we do more videos looking a little more in depth around the shop. That's basically where I do clock work, and basically where I do my radio work too, right in there. So thank you for tuning in and watching my first video after 2 years.